In 2015, Justin Trudeau promised to make every vote count and end our first-past-the-post system forever. But he lied to Canadians. Now, the NDP is offering to make those changes, and for real this time. Hey everybody, hope you're having a great one. Thanks for stopping by. Today I want to talk a bit about electoral reform. You know, I've spent a lot of time on this channel about how Justin Trudeau has lied about electoral reform and how he uses the current system and how his party uses the current system to keep progressive voters hostage, to basically say to them, look, I'm going to be a neoliberal. I'm not going to actually implement the things we need to implement. But at the end of the day, you're my hostage because it's either me or Scheer. And don't you dare think about voting for the NDP or Bloc or Greens or anybody else. I am the only game in town. We've talked a lot about that. But today I want to go a little bit more positive and talk about how the NDP has seized on Trudeau's failure and is offering a mixed member proportional system. A couple days ago, the NDP announced that this system would be their choice. That if the NDP forms government, they would implement this system. Or, in the case of a minority, the NDP would demand the implementation of this system in exchange for their support. You know, if the Liberals, for example, needed the NDP support to stay in power, they would demand as one of their package of demands, mixed member proportional representation. And this system is the best one for Canada, at least in my view, because it preserves local representation while giving us proportionality. It doesn't divide the powers between the provinces. The provinces will all have the same amount of seats they have now. You don't have to worry about the Maritimes losing seats or anything like that, the smaller provinces. And it creates a real opportunity to represent the diversity of voices in Canada. And so here's basically how it works. Step one works as it always has worked. You would vote for your local MP. The ridings would perhaps be a bit bigger because we would likely keep the same size of parliament but take about a third of the seats and devote them to proportionality, which means ridings would get bigger, the actual, represented ridings, the traditionally structured ones. But you would get a vote as you always did. You could vote for your MP based on party or based on the local representative. You could make your choice. But unlike our current system, you don't have to lock in your choice for both the local and the national. You can have two choices. So in the second part of your ballot, you get to vote for the party. And so there you can, for instance, say, really like your local Liberal MP, think he's a great guy or gal, but don't like Justin Trudeau and his broken promises. You could vote for your local Liberal MP and then vote for the NDP or what have you federally, saying that I like my local guy, but the vision of the party I don't like so much. Or vice versa. You could say I really don't like the local guy from this party, but I love the vision of the party more generally, so I can make that decision. And unlike some European models which use closed lists, in Canada we would likely use an open list system, which means that while the party will have a list of people who will be available to choose for those proportional seats, all of those people will be seeking a seat in the general region of the country. So for example, in Eastern Ontario, all the proportional choices will be based on people running in that area of the province. And you don't have to follow the party's order. You can choose to go against the party's order. So you might see that the number one choice for the party is somebody you're not really that passionate about. The person you love is halfway down the list. You can say, yeah, I want to support the NDP proportionally, but I disagree with their ordering. I'm going to go and mark that person as my proportional one. So that when it comes to allocations, that person will have a greater chance of being allocated the seat when it comes to proportionality. And there's been some concerns about fringe voices getting into Parliament. And on the one hand, I think that's a bit of a red herring, because if people are voting for something, it means they believe in it. And the reality is we should respect the will of the voters. But these systems are often designed with thresholds in mind. So you could, for instance, have a 5% threshold, meaning that parties that get, say, 1%, which would entitle them to about 3 seats in Parliament if you did a full proportional transition, wouldn't get any seats because 1% isn't strong enough. But 5% would guarantee you proportional allocation. 5% being, big enough to have a meaningful proportion of the population, yet small enough that under the current system, they're largely excluded. So for instance, you would see more seats for these smaller parties, but the absolute fringe parties wouldn't get any seats at all. So you don't have to worry about that. And if they get more than 5%, then I'm afraid to say, whether we like it or not, those parties aren't fringe anymore. They're small, but they're not fringe. So I think this system is the best representation of the will of the electorate. It preserves what's vital in our diverse and large country, which is geographic representation. You're still going to have your local MP that you can go to, that you can call up, that you can go complain to about whatever's happening. But you'll get that proportional representation that means that your voice will be adequately heard and that more voices will be adequately heard. And this is crucial for a whole bunch of other reasons. I can't get into them all, but it's important for a couple key ones. And the first is that this will address the geographic disparities in our current system. In our current system, the Maritimes is 100% represented by the Liberal Party. Right now they have all the seats in the Maritimes, every single last one. That doesn't reflect the will of the Maritime voters. They voted for the Liberals pretty heavily, but they didn't vote 100% for the Liberals, or even 80 or 90% for the Liberals. Not anywhere close to that. Yet they got all the seats. So the reality is that a proportional system would make it so that Maritimers wouldn't just be represented by one party, but yet would have Conservative and Liberal and Green and NDP voices all there to represent their diverse regional concerns. And the same can be said for Alberta, which largely is always represented by Conservatives. And the fact is that Alberta is not 90% Conservative. I mean, in the last provincial election, about 55% of Alberta voted for Jason Kenney's Conservative Party, United Conservative Party. But the reality is that that's not 100%. So a proportional system would give more voice to NDP and Liberals and Greens in Alberta. And that's important too. So it means that there are less wasted votes overall and in regions. If you're a Conservative in Alberta, there's a good chance your vote is wasted, that you actually don't count, because if you're in a riding that gets 75% Conservative every time, then a good chunk of their Conservative voters are just marking a ballot for no functional purpose. And the same thing in the Maritimes this time. A whole bunch of Liberals, their vote didn't count either because they won by such big margins. I think another crucial factor that the Liberals have really honed in on, is they've tried to stoke the fear that, implementing a proportional system like mixed member proportional will lead to a dangerous far-right revolution in Canada, and that within a couple years we'll be swarmed by Nazis and fascists and what have you. Justin Trudeau made this point, saying our system is the only system that can protect us from the far right. But I frankly think that that's bullshit. It really is. Because look at our system. Look at what it's given us. It's given us Jason Kenney. It's given us Doug Ford. It might give us Andrew Scheer with less than 40% of the vote. And not only giving us Andrew Scheer with less than 40% of the vote, giving us an absolute majority of seats to Andrew Scheer with less than 40% of the vote. How is that a fair system? I'm not saying Andrew Scheer is a fascist or a Nazi. I'm not saying that at all, and I don't want that to be taken away from this. That's not the takeaway. But a lot of people see his views as extreme and dangerous. And yet, he would win absolute power under our current system, and not any other. So that's one of the things we have to challenge the Liberals on. Liberals need to understand, Liberal supporters and Liberal politicians, they need to be challenged with the fact that our system is the one that gives Conservatives absolute power with a minority of the vote. It's the only system that does that. If we had mixed member proportional in Ontario right now, Doug Ford, at worst case, would be premier in a minority government. And he would be well short of the majority he needs to do all of the awful things he's doing right now. He could still get some of the things done with support of other parties. He could still govern potentially. But he wouldn't have unchecked power that just allows him to just run ramshot over local democracy and teachers and nurses and all of these things. And maybe even the case that there could be a coalition formed against him. There could have been a coalition of Greens and NDPs and Liberals to form a coalition led by Andrea Horwath to form a government that would govern on compromise and would govern on a diversity of views, and that would put Doug Ford out of government and on the opposition benches. That would be possible under proportional representation, but our current system gave Doug Ford absolute power. So, frankly, I think the NDP has a winning policy here. The Liberals burned a lot of people when they broke their electoral reform promise. And Liberals on social media will tell you that it's the NDP and the Conservative and Greens' fault that we don't have proportional representation, or we don't have ranked ballots, or we don't have any kind of reform at all. But at the end of the day, the Liberals made a promise 1,800 times to make every vote count and to end first past the post. And they did neither. And they have a majority in the House of Commons, so there was nothing to stop them from keeping their promise. We want a system that makes every vote count. Mixed member proportional does that. We want a system that recognizes the diversity of thought in Canada while representing people in their local areas. Mixed member proportional does that. We want a system that ensures that entire regions of this country aren't just represented by one party. Mixed member proportional does that. And do we want a system that prevents one party who is often ideologically opposed to the rest of them from gaining absolute power with just a small proportion of the vote? Mixed member proportional does that too. To me, it's a no-brainer. If progressives want real, lasting change in this country, there's only two things I can see making that happen. One, and the most likely to make it happen, is an NDP government. Progressives, all those people who want to forever end the possibility of unrepresented absolute conservative majorities, they need to support the NDP. But barring that, at the very least, the Liberal Party cannot win a majority government. They cannot be allowed to govern with a majority. The Liberals can govern with a minority, and there's a potential that they will implement proportional representation if that's the price to keep them in power. They might not do it still, but there's at least a chance. But if there's a Liberal or Conservative majority, that possibility dies for another half decade. You need to vote strategically, but not in the ABC variety that Justin Trudeau hopes you do. You need to vote strategically for the future and need to realize that the NDP is the most likely vessel to achieve electoral reform in this country federally. So let's make it happen. Let's end our crappy, broken, unrepresentative system, and let's do it forever. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would appreciate it if you liked, commented, and subscribed. And let me know what you think. Do you think it's time that we end first past the post? And if so, what system do you support? I support mixed member proportional, but I also know things like the single transferable vote are also really good. I'm not a huge fan of ranked ballots, although I do find them acceptable at the municipal level, but I want to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. And if you can, I would really appreciate your support on Patreon. Supporting me there helps to bring a progressive voice to YouTube and helps to improve the quality and quantity of this content. So guys, I'll see you in the next video.